Attendees tonight, thank you. All of the attendees tonight could please mute your devices. And then also just wanted to make you aware that the presentation would be recorded. Are there any questions? Okay, then we can begin. Welcome to the League of Women Voters West Metro Alliance Program Election Debrief. I am Melissa Mussliner, a member of the League of Women Voters, was at a Plymouth area, and your moderator for the evening. The League of Women Voters encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. It encourages members to be informed participants in political activity, but as a nonpartisan organization, it does not oppose or support any political party or candidate. Membership is open to all persons 16 and over. And for more information about the League, please visit our website. I did put the web address in the chat, but I will say it. It is www.lwvmn.org. Now, we are very fortunate to have two knowledgeable speakers with us tonight, Karl Landscraner and Michael Wall. They will each speak for 20 minutes, followed by a 10-minute question and answer period. Our first speaker is Karl Landscraner. He became the Voter Engagement Program Manager at Hennepin County elections in November 2023. Previously, he served for 6 years as the Political Director of Fair Vote, Minnesota. Mr. Landscraner will give a post-election debrief on elections in Hennepin County. We will have a few minutes for your questions following the presentation, and to maximize our time together, we ask if you will type your questions in the chat box, and we have a couple of people who are monitoring the chat box. Thank you, Mr. Landscraner.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and thank you all for having us today to talk about the election. Now, we've had a couple weeks here to decompress and start to see all the stories that we've had to learn here in 2024. So let me get my screen shared just a second. Every time I screen share on these things, I can't remember which side to move my mouse to go to one or the other. So all right, is this showing up for everyone well?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right, so here we go. Now I have to make sure I'm on which side to move forward. There we go. All righty. So yeah, some of the topics that we're going to go over are we're going to talk about turnout and kind of what the narrative we can find from these election results in Hennepin County specifically are in 2020, see where turnout was highest, lowest, as well as see some of our other election information, such as absentee voting rates, same-day registration rates, and how those might change geographically. We'll also talk about absentee voting and how this year was obviously a really informative year for us to kind of see how absentee voting is going in Minnesota. Then we'll move on to talk about election security, some new election laws that we had this year. We had over, I think, 200 new election laws were put on the books in the last 2 years. So a lot of stuff going on there. We'll talk a little bit about the upcoming legislative session, and then a little bit about voter engagement, which is what I do here with the county, engaging voters across the county and making sure that they know how to vote, where to vote, and have all the information they need to get to the polls. So kind of start as a rough overview. We see that the overall story to this election was that it was just incredibly smooth. We had really high turnout again. I mean, over 80% in Hennepin County. It was, I think, 85% 4 years ago. Is just so good turnout. It's hard to really know where we can specifically go for big turnout increases at this point. We know a lot of pockets, and this is a lot of work that we do of going to places where we know turnout is going to be lower, but like compared to the rest of the country, we're just blowing everyone away, which is awesome. We saw a whole bunch of absentee ballots, which is really great this year because we've only had no excuse absentee voting in Minnesota since 2014, meaning this is just the third presidential election, where we've had absentee large scale, and the last one was COVID, which obviously threw a wrench into kind of knowing how many voters we'd expect to be voting absentee. And so this was a really good chance to kind of see that absentee voting kind of reach an equilibrium. We'll go over that in a little bit. And yeah, just again, really hard to pick a very specific narrative or story from this election on the county side because it just is really smooth and went very well. So talk a little bit about turnout here, and I have some maps on one of the next slides that I'll show you. And in terms of timing of this presentation, that's either going to take much longer, much less time than I expect. So we'll just kind of roll with that. But there's a lot of really cool visual data that we've put together that we'll get to in just a second. But yeah, as I said, the county saw a higher turnout than the state average by about 5%. Statewide turnout was 76%. As I said, we were just below 82% here in the county. A couple interesting things that we did see, we saw that there was higher turnout in the suburbs largely, but that wasn't necessarily, oh, some of my words here are cut off. But we didn't see that higher turnout was necessarily just a suburban only thing going on. We'll see in a moment. A lot of the highest turnout, actually the highest turnout precincts in the state were in Minneapolis, and a lot of the shifts in turnout between 2020 and 2024 didn't necessarily follow a economic or urban or rural or urban or suburban, mostly in this county, divide as we might expect in past elections. Saw much more same-day registration at the university, which was not really unexpected, but good to see that continues to be very high. A couple, of the interesting points that we've seen in this election is, on turnout. We saw turnout go down in most cities in the county, obviously, because turnout was a little bit lower overall than 2020, but it went up by like 5% in Excelsior, but down by 3% in Tonka Bay, which is right next door. Minneapolis turnout fell by only 3%, which is less than it was in a lot of the suburban cities. So again, the turnout difference was very uneven. It was hard to see a real narrative or story coming from why some places had much higher turnout than others compared to 4 years ago. Move on to here, and here this takes a little bit of time, so I hope you can see it, but this is a link that I'll share with all of you about we have this on our website at the county, and it's a great way to kind of see differences in turnout, registration rates, absentee voting across the county by election. So to start, we'll just kind of go over, let's do 2024 right now. And these are kind of maps, which might be a little hard to see. And again, I'll get you this link. That'll make it easier to play around with later. But of the turnout, absentee rate, and then election day registration rate across the county. So again, we saw a really high rate of turnout. Almost 50% of voters voted absentee, which is really, really cool and really exciting. And another high year for election day registration. Over here on the side, I've kind of shown sort of this by precinct. So kind of as I said here, we have 92% of Minneapolis Ward 13 Precinct 9 voted, which is just phenomenal. We had a number of precincts that voted with over 90% turnout. That includes precincts in Edina, Golden Valley, in St. Louis Park. So and Bloomington and St. Anthony, sorry, all of those. So yeah, Golden Valley, Minneapolis, St. Anthony, Bloomington, St. Louis Park, and Edina are the cities that had precincts that went over 90% turnout. And yeah, that's just really exciting. We're super glad to see some precincts even increase in turnout from 4 years ago. And then it kind of, if you play around here, this is a little hard to demonstrate, but you can kind of see maybe it's going to show up, maybe not. Earlier today was showing up if you hovered over the exact precinct that and see what the turnout and that stuff was, but that's not showing up now. I keep going to the next one. So then kind of going on from there, we can see where our trends are from the past couple election cycles. So this chart I've narrowed to just be general elections and even years, so midterms and presidentials. And we see again, this top bar is turnout. And that really, went down just by a tiny bit after 2016 to 2018, but has been fairly steady over these past 8 years. And again, reaching almost the 2020 height this year in turnout. Absentee ballots, this is kind of what I mentioned earlier. We saw that huge spike, obviously, in 2020. And kind of my guess, and it turned out to be roughly where we're at, is that the absentee rate roughly split between 2020 and the 2022 midterm. So that's going to be really good information for us to know 2 years from now, and especially 4 years from now, on how many people we expect to vote absentee. Then again, registration on election day staying about stable, going up a little bit. So yeah, all really interesting stuff there. Again, just showing a story of it was very smooth and went well. In terms of total voters, again, roughly the same thing. We didn't really see a huge difference in total raw votes. Cast, we're talking 60,000, 65,000 difference between 2024 and 2020. Then we'll kind of show briefly the total registration rates. Again, interesting thing, people are interested to see the registration rates. Not huge changes in the past 4 years or so, and we've actually ticked down a little bit in total registration. Lastly, we'll go over here to the overview. This shows everything by city, which is kind of another nice way that we can see how different areas voted. It's showing up. So we see Minneapolis had a turnout of 78%, Bloomington almost 83%. And the cool thing with this chart here is we can go down and, oops, it's a little bit harder when you're on here. Find the general from 2020, and then if it's a little annoying to switch back, but we could see, yeah, roughly the same thing. Turnout decreased a little bit across the county, but not by huge numbers. All right, so now we'll look at absentee voting a little bit. We see that absentee voting obviously went up by a lot compared to 2020, which was not expected, or which not unexpected. The big thing that we really noticed from this election, so here is right here, the in-person versus mail rate of return for ballots. So basically this purple line on top, and it's the same thing down in the pie chart. The purple is how many ballots were returned by mail, and gray is how many ballots were in-person voters. And we saw early on in early voting, most people were returning mail ballots by a pretty significant amount, and this stayed steady for at least the first couple weeks. What's interesting is starting on I believe October 18th, it could be wrong slightly, direct balloting started, which meant that voters who went to vote early could actually put their ballot directly into a machine and have it counted right there, instead of having to put it in an absentee envelope and giving it to somebody and just waiting for it to be counted. So once that happened, we saw that the rate of people voting in person just dramatically skyrocketed and reached almost 70% of ballots that were cast early were cast in person. Now, we did have a lot of great help with Minneapolis running pop-up locations and satellite early vote centers, which was fantastic. But we really see, I think, the direct cause of that direct balloting change, that voters were really, really excited to vote early, and knowing that they could have their ballot go right in the machine really made a big difference. We also see that absentee ballot returns really follow about what we would expect, but really narrowed off here near the end. We saw just a massively high rate of ballots that were sent out were returned. We don't have the numbers yet on how many people were mailed ballots and ended up voting in person yet, so that would make kind of that gap actually be a little bit less, because there were a number of people who were sent an absentee ballot, and then in some cases, unfortunately, that ballot was never received or never got back to us, or did get back to us and they made a mistake, so we had to send them a replacement ballot. So this gap is actually a little bit lower, which is nice to see. I'll go into security a little bit. There's not a whole lot that we can really say or dive deeply into on the security measures that the county specifically took in 2024, but really know that just overall, this was really something that was on the top of our minds and something that we planned uh, very strongly for. So we work closely with state and federal partners who are, identifying potential threats to the voting systems or our offices or polling locations in advance, as well as with local law enforcement, who we would work with if any situations did arise on election day. Now, again, luckily, we didn't have any of these situations, and didn't, apart from a few threats that were sent kind of across the state, didn't really see anything super direct or targeted at us specifically, which was really great. Another thing that kind of I just throw out there when we talk about election security in general is just to always remind folks and talk about how we have a paper-based election system. Everything is kind of, as I mentioned earlier at the start, we just had a public act retest. Select precincts are recounted after the election. Everything can be backed up and found post-election. So that's just a nice security that we don't really have a concern about someone hacking into our voting machines or something like that, because again, it's all on paper at the end of the day. I'll go into briefly some of the new election laws. Obviously, we're probably pretty familiar with most of these. Folks who have been sentenced for a felony but are no longer in prison but still on parole recently regained the right to vote. This was the first presidential election where that was the case. Automatic voter registration and pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds, and then permanent absentee voting were also big new law changes this year that our division did a lot of work on to educate the public on. I'll mostly focus and go into a bit more depth on the permanent absentee voting and restoration of voting rights, on how those impacted our work this year. Obviously, with the felon voting rights, it was one of the most inspiring and cool things to be at events, finding people who said that they didn't think they could vote because they had a felony, and then being able to tell them, actually, yes, you can. That was really exciting. And again, we don't have specific numbers on how many of those recently reenfranchised folks did vote, but do know that people are still getting that message out, and we're working with a lot of community partners as well to do the same thing. Next, on the permanent absentee voting, this was the first year that we've had that. So sent out a lot of ballots kind of in the very, very beginning phase of early voting. Again, worked very well. People got their ballots. Very few people forgot that they'd signed up for the permanent list and received a ballot and called us saying, what's this ballot doing? So folks remembered that. I would say the biggest thing that we've been able to kind of fix since then, but early on, we saw a lot of people who didn't recall which number they put down on their application. So they put their driver's license when they applied for their permanent absentee ballot, and then put their social when they returned their ballot. That initially caused some hiccups very early on, but we were able to resolve that, and everything went super smoothly. Those issues were really mostly in the primary too, not really in the general. Then we'll go into legislative priorities. Really not a whole lot going into this coming session. Obviously, over 500 legislative changes in the last 2 years. We're almost definitely going to have a split House of Representatives, so would not expect, definitely not anything super partisan, but nothing super major overhauling elections to go through the session this year. And really focused on small technical changes. So one specific one would be you may know people or may have received mailings from other organizations with like a absentee ballot application that already has like your name and address and the information they have on file for you, where you would just have to put in a couple things and sign and return. One thing that we're supporting would be a bill just to say that those applications have to say who sent those, so they know who got them to register or apply for an absentee ballot. Lastly here, just touching a little bit on voter engagement and our activities this year. Our staff attended over 110 events across the county. These were libraries, festivals, trainings for staff at homeless shelters or folks working with folks who don't have a permanent address. We went to a lot of disability organizations and did a lot of demonstrating of the Express Vote, which is a new accessible ballot marking device that Hennepin County has. Will be replacing the Omni ballot in probably starting next year. Really, we've started the rollout this year, and that was just really exciting too, to go around and show folks and machine that made it even easier for them to cast their ballot. And I'm obviously not a blind voter, but one of our coworkers is, and we took it to one of his National Federation of the Blind conventions, and they just loved it. It was really exciting to see people get really excited about a machine that, like, I think is really cool and fun, but I obviously am not someone who's experiences the need for it. So seeing them react to the changes that might seem subtle to me, but were really important for them, was really exciting. The last thing I'll kind of mention quickly here is that we do have a post-election survey. You can find it at www.hennepin.us/GE-survey. This is for folks who voted, to try to identify any barriers or issues that folks felt while they voted. So if you went to vote this year and had a great time and everything went easy, please fill that out so we can know that went well for you. But if you or anyone experience problems or barriers in terms of getting to the polls, casting the ballot, language issues, anything like that, please send this to them and fill it out so we can get that information and work on improving by next year. So yeah, that's what we have here. I can turn this over to questions and glad to answer anything anyone has.
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute. I do see the first question here from Marty. I know you did talk about the precincts, and she's asking if there is a list of the top 10 cities with the highest voter turnout and the percentage. I don't know if that might be in that link you said you'd be
Yes,
sharing with us.
that will be there as well. I can find that for everyone in just a moment here. I can probably start sharing as well. Yeah, so this page is a little nerdy for election people like me, but really has a lot of great stuff just for the county here. So here we can go and sort by, oops, this is where it becomes a little hard. Oh, it's not gonna, the buttons are so small on this that it's hard to work on
Yes.
them without going all the way out of something else. So we can find that later, but yeah, I know what that list is somewhere.
Okay. Well, and if you could again share that link, it looks like another guest here, Jill, would like to look up data for cities where she lives in Hennepin County, nearby, um, and how she can access that. So maybe before you
I grabbing
leave,
that now, I can get it right into chat.
great. Thank you. Okay, so that is in the chat if anyone wants to click on that.
Oh, I'm just watching a Zoom, so I'm moving over so I can hold on.
And then I'm going to ask if a person votes in person after they have a ballot sent to them, how does the system account for that?
Yeah, so we can, when someone votes on election day, basically, and I can
There?
explain the process if I remember exactly which step is which, but when absentee ballots are returned to our office, we accept them
No,
and then hold them for a period of time for all of the election workers at their precincts to sync their poll books so we can get updates on who's voted. So, for example, if Melissa sent an absentee ballot and it was received, at the last second on election day, but to be safe, she went to vote at 10 o'clock. She would go vote. If her ballot was received, say, a half hour later, we would know that her ballot was, that she had already voted, so we would spoil that ballot. So it's all very well put together so that, yeah, there's not going to be an overlap of someone voting by mail and then being able to vote in person as well.
Did you feel like you had enough election judges?
Yes, definitely. We had a lot of cities that were just telling us to, you know, telling us that they had plenty and didn't need us to send anymore. We did have a few folks we were able to sign and loop in with cities, but yeah, as far as we know, all of our cities had plenty of judges.
It's good to know. You had mentioned the youth and the automatic registration. Do you have a sense of the youth turnout?
Hard to say right now. I did look at some of the areas around the university. It's a little apples to oranges because of the precinct redistricting around there changed a lot from 2020 to 2024. So just looking at like the precincts that are roughly the U, uh, again, not really as scientific as I would like. Turnout only dropped there by about 3% or so. So did not see a huge decrease in turnout at the university. One of the interesting things we saw was that a lot of college kids, the absentee voting rate was very, very low, which kind of actually makes sense if you think about it, because those people who are voting absentee probably are voting back home, and voters who want to vote here are just going to vote on election. A lot of them are going to be same day registrants. But yeah, that was definitely interesting. Turnout definitely seemed about the same, at least for college students. Hard to tell anything else. But yeah, that absentee rate was just a lot lower than we saw throughout the city or throughout the county.
Um, and then one of our members, Sue, is asking if the ballots have barcodes. So how, for example, was the firebomb Dropbox ballots linked to locate voters affected?
Yeah, so the ballots themselves, at least in Hennepin County, do not have barcodes, but we can only count and take a ballot that comes in the security envelope that's signed by the witness and all of that. So if for whatever reason we found a ballot and that information was not there, then I don't think there's anything we'd be able to do to tie that back to someone, because it didn't have, we wouldn't be able to verify it had a witness and all of that. How other states do it, I don't know exactly what they did in the firebombs, but I'm sure they were able to put pieces together because those ballots were still in, they were still in something.
Mhm. I'm just checking the chat. Do you think we would ever go to all mail-in
So
ballots?
not for Hennepin County. That's not something that I believe we can do in Hennepin County. I haven't been hearing a lot of pushes to move us to a entirely mail-in state like Colorado or Washington or Oregon, but uh, yeah, that's as far as I know here. I do know, we had very few lines on election day, so there still seems to be a good demand for voting on election day, but not so much that it's overwhelming either one.
Okay, well, that's good. Yeah, I think with COVID, a lot of us got used to doing the mail-in and found
Exactly.
how
That's why
easy
this year
that was.
that's why this year we were really curious to see how things felt, because there was just really no comparison and no way to guess what it was going to be.
Well, let's take this one last question from Sandra. Do absentee ballots have to be received by election day to count? My college daughter got hers pretty late and she didn't want to risk it and voted in California.
Yes. Sorry. I didn't see the full question there. Yeah. So they do need to be received by election day. That was another new law change that went into effect this year. Ballots can be received by 8 p.m. on election night. In the past, they had to be received by 3 p.m. So that does give a little bit of extra time for folks. One thing that I didn't actually know until this year, but is great if people are ever in a situation like this, and we were on the phones and receiving, the calls from the people who did have problems where a ballot didn't arrive or didn't get back in time or whatever, is you can put it in, a FedEx or UPS box and same day it. We can also offer expedited delivery from our office. There's a couple steps that need to be taken. The voter has to, pay and provide the shipping label for us. But if that's all taken care of, we can put an absentee ballot in a expedited thing. We try not to say tell to too many people because we don't want to be overwhelmed with with requests, because it's a very labor intensive process for us. But there is that option there for voters who need it at the last minute.
That's excellent. That really seems kind of above and beyond, and I'm impressed. I know that we, would love to keep talking with you and have a few more questions, but we do have another speaker to get to. And it is hard to applaud on Zoom, but I know that everyone is very grateful for your time. I'm not sure if you will be staying with us or if you will be jumping off here. You're of course welcome to stay, and then we may have more questions at the end, but up to you.
And we will
Thank you so
talk
much
about you
for
if you
having
go,
me.
Carl.
This was great. Yeah, I may have to run and help with bedtime in a minute, but I'll try to stay on as long as I can.
Okay, thank you so much. And now our second speaker is Michael Wall. He is the Youth Voter Outreach Specialist in the Office of the Minnesota Secretary of State. He spends his days connecting young people to the power of our representative democracy and their place in it. His background is in secondary and higher education and relationship development. He will talk about his work and the national study of learning and voter engagement. Hopefully you saw that both, you have contact information for both speakers in the chat. And now, without further ado, Mr. Wall.
Thank you very much, Melissa. And thank you, Carl. That was great information. So I've got a background in a couple of things, but PowerPoints is not one of them. So I tend to overload them. I have given Debbie the PowerPoint. Anyone can get it through her or through me. Happy to share it. But I definitely have about 2 hours worth of information. So I'll be speaking fast and highlighting. But here we go. First of all, you want to know that you've been duped. I am not going to spend a good portion of time on NSOLVE, the National Study of Learning and Voting Engagement. I'm going to talk about it a little, but as you'll see, there's not a ton to go into. We're going to spend most of our time talking about youth voting in Minnesota, and that's not the statistics, but in what we're doing to counter what keeps young people from voting. So here we go. NSOLVE, the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, is out of Tufts University. A lot of great civic engagement and election stuff comes out of Tufts. We'll refer to Circle at Tufts University in a little bit. And I'm using, by the way, screenshots from the 2022 report, which is the latest one out. It does take a while for all of this information to be collected and then these reports to be created. But this is for St. Olaf. Not only did they win the Democracy Cup, which is our statewide voter turnout, post-secondary institution voter turnout contest we have every 2 years, but they were also the highest in the nation. So what does an NSOLVE report? And by the way, taking part in this study is completely up to the university. The information goes only to them. And if they choose to share it, they may, but they don't have to. And it doesn't cost anything to participate. And the data is kept very tightly watched, and security is very high here. So what does a report include? I tried to do some underlining here for you. But yes, the voter participation rate for the campus is a highlight, but it goes well beyond that to identify who is doing the voting and who is not doing the voting by different demographic areas. Also, there is a comparative. So if you, as a campus, took part in NSOLVE as far back as 2014, you'll be able to see the rates on your campus to do historical comparisons. That's the upper right. National averages to be able to compare what your campus is doing, and then voter method utilization. Who is voting in person, who is voting early, etc. here is what the most people who get these reports turn to this page first, because this is the voting rate. And the 2022 reports came out just in July of this year. It was later than it normally is. But you can see all institutions nationwide that take part in NSolve were almost 31%, and St. Olaf was inching up to 68% voter turnout. And while we do see a small decrease, 3.2% from the last midterm, everybody pretty much went down nationwide. So nothing to be ashamed of there. And you can see a lot more of this if you go on to the Tufts Tisch College website, and you can see the national reports and campus reports where they gave permission, etc. Okay, so not going to do a ton of statistics, but 2022, which is the last election we have data for, Minnesota was not the highest youth voter turnout. We were actually tied for third, but we were very strong, having a statewide youth voter turnout, and that's 18 to 29, above 30% was lauded, and we were 35.5, behind Maine and Michigan, and tied, it might have been with Colorado, I don't remember, but historically, 2020, 65%, which was second in the country, and in 2018, first in the country. Just like Minnesota, writ large, our youth have a very solid voter turnout for young people. This is from the Civic Center, which is a great organization for looking at civic and voter participation. While we don't yet know the state or national registration rates for young voters in 2024, looking at 2020, fewer than half of 18-year-olds were registered. That is awful. We work on that year-round, election year, non-election year. In 2022, only 30.6% of 18-year-olds were registered, not even voter turnout, but registration. It's important to know that when you talk about turnout, one of the big differences between older voters and younger voters is not necessarily just that turnout percentage. Because if you look at the percentage of registered voters who turn out, they're pretty close. 86% for 18 to 24-year-olds. This is from the 2020 census. And for 25 and older, 92%. That's only 6% difference. So where's the bigger, much more significant difference? It's in the percentage of young people who are registered. And some of the things that Karl mentioned about changes in the law are great help with that. Automatic voter registration, yes. Pre-registration, definitely. So we work on registration pretty heavily. So why are these rates lower, and what are we trying to do about it? Circle at Tufts University did a wonderful study asking young people who didn't vote why they don't vote. And the top two answers are approachable easily. I mean, it takes effort, but number one, as you can see, nobody asked me to. Nobody asked me to. Why didn't you take out the garbage? Well, nobody asked me to. If you get the sense that it's your house and your garbage, you're probably more likely. But saying, would you please take out the garbage, is likely to get it done, and it's the same with voting in young people. And two, my paraphrase, I don't want to look stupid. Young people have such an incredible access to information through their phones, through the internet, that the notion of going to a place they've never been, getting asked questions they don't know what they're going to be asked, They're not going to know where to go within the room, the polling place. What does it look like? They back off until they feel comfortable before they go. So how do you feel comfortable beforehand? You teach them what's involved. Okay. So nobody asked me to. On the college level, we talked about some of the laws, some additional laws that affect post-secondary institutions is they are required twice a year to give out voter registration information. They are required now to have a web page on elections information on their school's web site. They are required to not only report on when and how they did this distribution of registration information, but they have to turn in to our office every year by the end of November, so I'm getting them now, a voter engagement plan for the school year. These are all things that used to be voluntary, might be done through All-In Campus Democracy Challenge, for example. Now they're required, along with a number of other things. There are 7 that were passed. We also have programs like the Democracy Cup, which I mentioned. We take part in the Student Voter Summit, bringing together student leaders and engaged faculty and administration to talk about skills and best practices, etc. How about Nobody Asked Me to High School Edition, pre-registration. The big thing about pre-registration as a change is that it's been shown that those young people who are pre-registered to vote are more likely to vote the first time they're eligible. And there are studies that show that if you vote the first time you are eligible to vote, you are much more likely to be a lifetime voter. That's huge. High schools are also required in May and September to distribute registration and now pre-registration information. And we just started this year with the State League and the major political parties in Minnesota, National Voter Registration Day in Minnesota high schools. We did a live walkthrough 2 times on NVRD with students who could take out their phone, take out a laptop, a tablet, and get walked through the process. Again, demystifying, tamping down on the anxiety and walking them through, giving them the information so that they feel comfortable. How about the I don't want to look stupid? How do we get the here's what they're going to ask? Here's what it looks like. Here's what you need to know so that you can be comfortable going into this new situation. Another study shows, and this is from Circle as well, that when young people too early to vote, too young to vote, are taught the how-to, the mechanics of voting, they are more likely, for the reasons we've said, to vote the first time they're eligible. Demystify. On the college level, those laws we talked about provide the kind of information that young people are looking for. And there are a series of programs that are run on the college level. We partner with different collegiate and university associations. That Student Voter Summit we talked about is a lot of skills stuff and how to get that information to students. And we produce a lot of materials to support campuses and young people. And here's an example. Here is our college student fact sheet, which many of you, I'm sure, have seen. On the high school level, I'm sure you know about the civics requirement. There are a lot of schools who used to have civics, even though it wasn't required to have civics classes, but they do them in 9th grade. Well, it's great to have civics, but if it's a few years before they're going to turn 18, there's a whole lot of life that happens to a high school student in between. So now it's required in 11th and 12th grade. Definitely challenging for some schools to rework their curriculum to move that civics class, but much better to have it fresh in the minds of students who are about to become voters, but who are also eligible to pre-register at that point. Wonderful. We run programs I hope you're familiar with. Students voting, the statewide K through 12 mock election was fabulous, record-breaking this year. 537 schools across the state. It was hundreds of thousands of votes. Absolutely wonderful. We do that every 2 years to, again, demystify what does a ballot look like, etc. And then, again, materials, additional support. All right, I've got 5 minutes. So here are some of the examples, right? Showing students, showing young people, what does a ballot look like? What's on this registration application? What's involved in registration? What is, and on the right, you can see what does a polling place look like? We also know that there are, you call it reason, you call it excuses, but what else do young people say about not voting? And if you've ever heard Secretary Simon talk to young people, and I have hundreds and hundreds of times since 2016, he takes a number of these head on. So I'm going to go quickly here. No one asked me to. We've talked about that. But you as an individual, you are involved in elections and voting. If you are standing in the line at Cub or Kowalski's or, you know, wherever you are, and you see a young person, asking them, are you registered to vote? I'm not asking.
Yes, me too. I wasn't sure if it was him or me. So we will wait. Hopefully he will log back in. And in the meantime, does anyone have questions to put in the chat now that we can make sure we can ask him when he rejoins? Oh, Marty, you're muted.
No, it's been very interesting so far. I'm hoping that he can hear us and see if he can try to log back in again.
Yes. Well, I obviously was thinking about the work that our league, and I'm sure the other leagues on the call, do in the high schools, helping with that voter registration, being at Cub Foods, where he was mentioning if you're in line. So, you know, I feel good about how we contribute.
Did anyone participate in mock voting? Any of the high schools of the people here? Edina did, and it was amazing. I learned one big thing. Many of the students said when they put their ballot in the box, do I need to sign this? That was a very common question. Do I need to sign the ballot? It was a great experience put together by our civics club in 2 weeks, working with Michael Wall. It was amazing.
Huh. Debbie, is that something we do? Do you know? Why is that out?
Oh, Michael's back on.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what happened. I still don't have access, but here we are. All right, let's see if I can bring in.
I wonder if it just froze again.
No,
Okay, there you are.
Oh, good.
yeah, I was trying to get it to, it for some reason has a background on me. All right, so I'm just going to keep talking, and I'm sorry you don't have the screens, but let me just, for a few of these, the notion that one vote doesn't matter, what I was about to say is that in Minnesota, at least since 2015, every single year that there have been elections which are tied or won by one vote, including 2024, 3 elections either tied or won by one vote in Minnesota in this most recent November election. So the notion that one vote doesn't count, in addition to the fact that it's your voice, it's your vote. And great cartoon, which you should definitely get it from Deb, because it's a fun cartoon that goes with that. There's too much on the ballot. We don't advertise this, but every young person and everybody, and we get calls every year asking, is it okay if I don't vote on everything? Because I don't know some of the, yes, vote on what you know, what you have an opinion on. Eventually, we would love all young people to know what a county commissioner does and soil and water commissioner, but vote what you know. Top of the ticket, most local, a friend of yours, you know, his dad is running for school board, whatever it is, vote what you know. I'm not into politics is another one. Well, politics is into you. The key here is, I think, to talk to young people about issues, not about political parties, because that gets really mucked up. Think about what's important to you and vote based on that alone. Doesn't matter what party you vote for if those candidates are supporting things that you feel are important for you, your family, your community, etc. Some say they don't like the system. It's messed up. It's not representational. Whatever it is, they're not going to vote as a protest. Well, Secretary Simon quotes a T-shirt he saw a few years ago all the time. Failure to vote is not an act of protest. It's an act of surrender. When you don't vote, somebody else, just through mathematics, gets the power of your vote. That's just the way it is. Some say, well, I don't like any of the candidates. A couple of things here. One, when they're talking, and many people focus on the presidency, right? The person whose daughter in the comments section voted in California, wanted to vote for president, but didn't get to vote for U.S. Senate or their local elections. So there is the notion of, I don't like any of the candidates, but you ask your average person before they see a ballot, how many people are running for president on the ballot in Minnesota? And they think 2, maybe 3. It was 9. And in 2020, there were 9 candidates, plus the ability to write in. Another thing is tell young people to be primary voters. The primaries, the August statewide primary in Minnesota, 12% voter turnout. Everyone who votes in the primary has a huge say in who's on the ballot in the fall. I don't want to look stupid. We've talked about that. Politicians don't listen to young people. Please wipe away this myth. Politicians listen to groups that vote. If young people voted, there would be many more politicians on college campuses and in, nightclub openings saying, hey, I'm hip, I'm cool, you should vote for me. What's important to the young folks these days? It's backwards from this, politicians don't listen to young people. All right, I want to take some questions. There are some images and some data after I called it an appendix, but it's in the slideshow. Please feel free to get a copy of it and use it as you wish. I would love to take some questions in the 6 minutes we have remaining, if anyone has any.
Yes, there are already 2 in our chat. We took the opportunity of your brief hiatus to write some questions in the chat.
Thanks.
So will student voting use ranked choice voting?
The mock election does not use ranked choice voting because ranked choice voting is utilized locally, not statewide. If that changes, then students voting will reflect that change. But what we do is give a realistic voting experience to hundreds of thousands of young people from elementary school all the way up to senior year. And without that, it's not doing them the favor we hope we are doing by giving them that here's exactly what you're going through. So where there is ranked choice voting on a ballot, it's reflected because they actually get their own sample ballot from that precinct where the school is located. So whatever the ballot actually looks like, that's what they get.
Yes.
Great question.
And while you were gone, you did get praise. We had someone here who had witnessed the Edina schools participating and said it was fabulous, and they had 2 weeks to set it up with your help. So that was excellent. The second question is, I have to believe that the new Minnesota civics requirement will have a profound effect on eligible high school youth voting. What are your hopes and expectations for youth voting in the 2028 election? From Jill.
Well, first of all, Jill, I would say my hopes connect to local elections next year, and then the 2026 midterm elections and the gubernatorial, and my hopes are constant and not just focus on the presidential. And the reason I bring that up is because we don't want students to think, or anybody to think of the election as just a presidential election. As you know, from seeing that ballot, many of you are election judges, you walk through ballots with people. Your political life, if you will, your vote has a lot more of an effect locally. And the changes you see, the effects of laws and policies, you see more locally than you do necessarily on a national level. So that's one thing. The other is that our office is going to be working with schools, asking, how can we help your civics teachers? We already do some of that with all teachers, social studies teachers. We work in partnership with local leagues all over the state and other groups as well. But in this case, we are going to be doing a big push really through high school teachers, and we have thousands of high school teacher email addresses, but mostly through administration, because MDE updates those email addresses every year, and that's what we mail out to, offering to help in regards to elections information, resources. If we don't have it, we'll develop it. And that's the message that all these schools are going to get, so that they can bring students into this sense that part of civics is learning to use your voice, and part of that is voting.
And is that how they learn about and can get involved with the mock elections? Through those emails, or?
Through those emails, through different associations like the State Social Studies League, through the principals and superintendents associations, we go out and we try to get press as well. We get a lot more press at schools for the voting than we do leading up to it. But we go out through legislators and say, are the schools in your district doing this? Because if a principal or somebody gets a call or an email from a state senator or a state rep and says, heard about this students voting thing. Are we doing this in Marshall? Are we doing this in fill in the blank? That's a nice push as well.
Yes, of those, I think you mentioned over 500 schools. Do you know how many are high schools? Are they all high schools, or?
No, not at all. I don't know offhand, but I will get you, or I'll get Debbie, the numbers of levels.
Oh, great. Okay.
And actually, I'm also going to send, so if you can send this out, a link to the results dashboard, which is just wonderful for students voting for this year. It's great to show how schools voted, how they compare, how they group, etc.
Mhm. Are there any other questions?
This is Colleen Feige. I just have a comment. Michael, thank you so very much for your help with Aditi Jha and Eleanor Schenk, who are our new civics club leaders. And I wanted to say, I know that they needed to report the results of the presidential race at 5 p.m. on the 5th, but we did not release the results of the mock vote until 8 p.m. on the 5th, because some of those kids could actually go to the polls and vote, and they might be influenced by that. But of the 2,700 students at our high school, 1,500 voted. It was amazing. And they asked questions, and they also talked about it the next day. They didn't have school on election day. This was held on November 4th. It was phenomenal. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. And it's a great conversation piece to talk to high school students because we had the same thing in 2016 when we started a high school program in the Secretary of State's office that then merged. But some people were complaining that the results from the high schools in 2016 and 2018 came out a week before the election, and that it would affect the election. The notion that how high school students vote affecting how you vote is a fascinating chat to have.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, Michael, I can see Colleen has caught your infectious enthusiasm, and I think the rest of us have as well. And I know many of the leagues here, if not all, are active with their local high schools and have high school interns that work with us and so forth, and do a lot to do the registration campaign. So, I think we're all on the same team here, and we
Go
want
team.
to thank you. Go team. Again, I think you were fabulous, and I appreciate your not being flappable with a little technical difficulties. So at this point, I want to thank you and Karl, and of course I know he's left, but also recognize the leagues in the West Metro Alliance. Many of the cities work together as one. So there's Brooklyn Park, Osseo, Maple Grove, Crystal, New Hope, East Plymouth, Robbinsdale, Edina, Golden Valley, Minnetonka, Eden Prairie, Hopkins, St. Louis Park, South Tonka, and the Wayzata Plymouth area. I want to note that Deborah Price has said the PowerPoint will go to the presidents and West Metro reps to be distributed. And Marty has your enthusiasm too. So we are grateful to you and grateful to all of you for joining us tonight. And I just want to wish you a good evening. Thank you.